right, so today I'll be presenting on bridging communities and careers, leaders shaping hydrogen's workforce future. Daniel Henry, currently working at AES Clean Energy. Firstly, I'll talk a little bit about myself more in detail so everyone can get to know me a little bit more on a personal level. Afterwards, we'll talk about AES as a whole at a glance. Next, I would like to talk about the growth of hydrogen globally, because I think that's an important view to have in order to understand the direction that the industry is going. Afterwards, we'll kind of dive in a little bit more specifically at the US market and the consumption, understanding the consumption and the production needs here in our country. Afterwards, then I'll pivot to speaking about clean hydrogen production, because that's generally what my projects are limited to, the more production aspect of it, and the workforce implications around that, and how we can support the growth of the economy. And then lastly, AES is a part of the Gulf Coast Hydrogen Hub, which is a part of the Department of Energy programs. That project is also known as High Velocity, so I'll be hitting on some of the community benefit objectives from that. And I've heard a question about that earlier today, so I'm hoping maybe I could add to that and answer some questions for that too as well. So again, I'm a Senior Development Manager at AES Clean Energy. I have been working here for about 4 months, but I have 8 years in the energy industry as a whole. I'm originally from New York, but also spent a lot of time in Kingston, Jamaica as well. But now I currently live in Houston, been here for about 8 years now. 2 of those years of the 8 are in the energy industry, are with renewable energy generation, so been with several renewable energy companies. And then of the 6, I've been a part of oil and gas. I also have a trade certification, so I did spend some time in high school, an extra year in high school actually, working at JFK Airport, working on aircraft. So I did have a separate life outside of energy, which was very interesting. Even interned at Raytheon Technologies as well while I was in college. Speaking of college, I did go to the University of Buffalo in New York, so very cold weather. Had to move down to Texas, great weather down here, I'm loving it. Even if it's Houston, coming from Jamaica, this is a cakewalk, right? And then I'm also married with a baby on the way. So going left to right, I'm sure you could picture which photo I was an engineer versus which one I was a craft technician based on the color of the vest. So I was really hands-on back in JFK. And in the leadership role in oil and gas, I was more project manager oriented. And then all the way to the far left is a photo of me and my wife and my boy that's coming on Thanksgiving. So I'll have a very busy holiday. Okay. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. All right, so I just wanted to tell everyone about AES because I know it's not a company that's really out there top of mind for everyone, right, compared to some other energy providers. So we're a Fortune 500 company with almost 10,000 people located throughout the globe. We operate in several countries, even though our roots are based here in the US. We are an energy provider with about 35,000 megawatts in operation currently, and about 5,000 megawatts under construction, and a whole lot more in development, right? Not just our typical, again, you can see the pie, renewables, we have gas, we have pet coke and coal, but our growing share of our focus is gonna be around renewables. So a lot of the projects we have in development are gonna be for renewables, including green hydrogen. We also are a utility company and a utility provider, so we are located in Ohio and Indiana and provide services to almost 3 million people in those states. So now I'll be talking about the growth of hydrogen globally. So this was a report that I believe came out a week and a half ago from the International Energy Agency. And I really like that it's an extensive report, but I think this one really grabbed my attention, right? So from 5 years ago, or not 5, I should say, probably closer to 3-4 years ago, back in 2021, specifically targeting green hydrogen, right? Because that's mostly what AES is focused on right now. We've seen a 50% growth in just those 3 to 4 years, right? For context, we're looking at developing several utility scale hydrogen projects The one that I'm specifically supporting is about 40 to 50,000 tons, million, no, 50, yeah, 40 to 50,000 tons per year. And the chart to my right is about, let's say, add a couple zeros, it's a lot more, right? So a whole lot more in 3 years' time, which is just amazing growth in a new industry with rules that are still being established, right, because of the main driver of clean energy. Going to the chart on the left, right, you can see that those are more announced projects. So you can see that back in 2021, again, my project for reference around 40 to 50, let's just call it 50,000 to make it simple. Multiply that by 100, that's what's, was announced back in 2021. Now, looking forward all the way to 2030, that's almost a thousand versions of my project, right, or equivalent size. So a lot of green hydrogen coming online in the next couple of years. So it's a very exciting time to kind of see our industry growing. And I'll just give a bit of background about myself and kind of why I'm interested in hydrogen. I again, used to work on aircraft. I used to work on cars as well. And in researching cars and trying to understand different fuel sources, I came across hydrogen as a potential fuel source for a car. And when I learned that you can create hydrogen from water and renewable electricity, I had a curiosity. I was like, why aren't we doing this across the board, right? And that's really what triggered my transition from aviation into the energy industry. So it's just, that was before I even started college back in 2011. So now seeing this growth ahead of us is really inspiring. All right, so I'll now talk a little bit about the U.S. hydrogen consumption and the clean hydrogen production. So currently right now, the U.S. consumes a little over 11 million metric tons of hydrogen per year, right? Of that, clean hydrogen is only about 1% of that. Or green hydrogen specifically is about 1%. I think blue is a little bit larger than that for sure. But again, over the next 5 years, just in the U.S. alone, we're expected to convert a little bit under 50% of that into clean hydrogen. And as you can see on the map to the left, a lot of those projects are going to be green-centric, even though you'll see sprinkles of blue and purple in there. There's going to be a massive amount of green hydrogen projects, which gets me excited as a developer, right, to be a part of this vision that's happening. So again, I mentioned that AES is a part of the High Velocity Hub, or the DOE's Gulf Coast Hub. So different names you may hear floating around. The goal of that hub, and there are 7 of them, is to create and produce around 3 million metric tons of hydrogen per year. So that's about a little bit less than 30% of our current consumption, right? Just from that small portion, we're estimating from one project, the Gulf Coast Hub, which is what we're a part of. We're also part of the California Arches Hub as well. We're predicted to create about 10,000 permanent jobs and 35,000 construction jobs. So that's a huge amount of jobs from a new industry coming online, right? And that's only one of 7 locations. In addition to that, there are other projects outside of these hubs and other opportunities outside of these hubs for our company and other companies as well, where we're advancing multiple green hydrogen projects. So a huge amount of growth is coming online in the U.S., and I'm very excited to be a part of that industry again, and really to help drive that forward. And the next slide is really going to be speaking to kind of some of the skill sets required for those jobs that I'm talking about, right? So I'll start the transition now. So this is, to the left, you'll see an example of rendering of what we envision one of our projects would look like, mostly a gaseous hydrogen, green hydrogen production play right now. So there are multiple phases of development for the project, right? So first, I'll speak on development. You'll have developers like myself that are working with other SMEs in other disciplines to progress this project, right? Conceptual, I think you heard it from the Technique presentation earlier before, right? You have different levels of design conceptually and all the way up to feed, pre-feed. We're currently going through pre-feed right now on one of my projects, actually. And there's also environmental diligence, right? So ensuring that we're not negatively impacting the environment, working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, working with NEPA, working with local tribes, right? And also making sure that we're not negatively impacting threatened and endangered species. So a lot of that work has to be done up front. As a developer, I work with local governments, local communities, local organizations, as well as the grid and understanding how our grid will function as it relates to our project. So that's going to be a massive undertaking as well. There is going to be permitting. There is going to be, of course, finance. So understanding how these projects are going to get financed and where the money's coming from. Not only that, but also driving that into a techno-economical model to making sure that we're optimizing and producing the right amount of hydrogen at the right time, because again, we have to comply with whatever shakes out from 45V. So analyzing those scenarios, making sure that we could basically produce hydrogen adequately in each scenario, no matter what sticks. So a lot of financing work goes into that. Accounting is planning some of that capital spend that we have, as well as our own internal accounting efforts that comes with every organization. Legal is going to be a part of this as well. So that's going to be working with different entities and creating different agreements. So for example, real estate, and ensuring that we have the land contracts or easements, working with utility companies on interconnection agreements, working with various other providers of water or people that would take our wastewater, right? So we have to get a lot of those agreements in place. Also, a huge part of our undertaking as well, especially as an industry that's in its infancy, is working with policy and government relations so that people could know what is a hydrogen project, right? And what does it entail? And what can we do to support this project, especially preparing for this massive growth in industry. So after we kind of get past the development phase and engineering, then on comes construction, right? So those 35K jobs coming into the Gulf Coast through just the hub, right? That's going to be a massive undertaking. So kind of in the previous slide where you saw I was wearing a hard hat, that was me, construction on a project that would be similar to this project, where you're going to have pipe fitters, welders, iron workers, painters, insulators, electricians, masonry folks. Yeah, it's going to be a huge undertaking to build these projects, right? A lot more involved than traditional wind and solar farms for the footprint. In addition to that, you're still going to need folks on the engineering side and folks on the business management side to manage that construction as well. Again, I myself was a project manager in the past and a project engineer. You're going to need multiple folks like us in order to really drive this project forward. So you need both the craft and people with that special skill set in engineering to really drive this forward. Then after it's fully built, you're going to need folks in operations as well, right? So your plant managers, your maintenance managers, your maintenance staff. So instrument technicians, mechanics, chemists, right? Because this is a chemical project by nature. So making sure that your water balances are right, your hydrogen quality is correct, and ensuring that a community is still ensuring safety in operations as well. So there's a massive undertaking of jobs that is encompassed in this, and you'll probably look at this and translate it to what you may see in the Gulf Coast now. So a lot of those skills are very transferable. I myself, again, coming from the oil and gas sector, being able to jump right in and being able to say, hey, yeah, I'm familiar with P&IDs and ISOs and things of that nature that you normally hear in a petrochemical facility, translated directly into green hydrogen. So that's a great thing especially here in Texas, where we have a strong influx of oil and gas folks. So again, a lot of these jobs that's coming online from this industry are going to be coming from folks that have these translatable skills. So workforce development is still going to be a key major piece of this, but I see that being maybe not as intensive an effort here in Texas because we have that skill set, thankfully, compared to some other regions in the US on the map that I've previously shown. All right, so on the next slide, I'll talk specifically about high velocity and the plans to implement the Department of Energy community benefits. So we as in sponsors, a part of high velocity, which AES is a part of, are gonna have an intentional directive, but also an intentional obligation to make sure that the community is involved in the development of these projects, right? They will have a say-so in understanding how we will impact them, but also we will have community advisory boards made up of multiple different organizations where we will be given updates to our projects, what to expect. We're going to be looking to engage in the workforce. AES has actually already inked a deal with local labor unions with intentions to support our project and development. So we're already kind of ahead of that milestone. That's going to be an obligation, as well as interfacing with community leaders, stakeholders, making sure that we're minimizing impact to the local community, right? So understanding what are their concerns and really being able to bring that forward and try to address that in a way. So that also involves workforce development training. So making sure that they feel included as a part of this massive growth, right? And that it's an equitable growth at that as well. I guess the last thing I want to hit on this slide is that we are also looking to be able to, I'm sorry, I can't see the word, let me turn around. Okay, yes. So the benefits to the community, right? So it's going to be really going out and engaging different folks and ensuring that we are trying to include those small businesses as a part of those conversations. As a developer from renewable energy projects, I'm always joining the Chamber of Commerce or interfacing with the local economic development committee and trying to understand how we can include small businesses. Usually there's a person that has his own fiber company or a guy that has his own fencing company, right? And we try to explore those ways of how we can plug them in with our construction folks so that way they can get contracted to do these jobs in order to support them. And I hadn't mentioned this earlier on the operations on a previous slide, but there'll be a lot of folks that we will be contracting services because to sustain our plant. Because even though we're going to hire and create jobs internally, we can't function this plant without ourselves. We're going to need different members of the Houston community to help serve us. So if it comes to water processing or chemical feedstock or external maintenance work during heavy turnaround periods, right, we're going to have to reach out to the community and try to pull them in order to help support our project. So that's really all I have to say for now. But yeah, open to any questions. Oh, careful.
Hey, Daniel, good presentation. First of all, it's more just a comment. I look at when you mentioned permanent jobs versus construction jobs and felt like maybe that wasn't fair to the construction jobs given the growth we're going to see. Those are basically going to be permanent for decades to come, potentially,
Yes.
right? It'll just be from one project to the next. But then I guess my question might be is, you talked about Houston workforce development there. I keep seeing a lot of hydrogen projects that are looking to develop in West Texas, in the Permian Basin area and so forth. How might all that workforce development, I mean, because maybe they don't have the skill sets that Houston already has, maybe they do, but any thoughts there?
Yeah, so typically, in my experience, how we've dealt with that is, one, we usually hold career fairs early on in the development phase to kind of vet positions to say, hey, these are the roles that we're looking to fulfill, right? So there may be local welders and other craftsmen that would be able to help. Generally, what I've typically seen is a lot of EPCs would leverage apprenticeship programs as well. So they would come in as pipe fitter level 1, right? And then throughout the construction job, they would kind of work their way up through to be a more senior level foreman. I was involved in a large project in the Corpus Christi area where we didn't have as much craftspeople as we needed for the undertaking of the project. And historically, that's kind of what I've seen, and I envision that happening for those hydrogen projects as well. Can't speak to those specific companies, but that's kind of what I'm envisioning would happen. And kind of to your point of, hey, this construction jobs doesn't mean temporary at all, and that's exactly why those words aren't there. Those people that will end the job and they will go from pipe level fitter 1 up till pipe level fitter 3 or welder number 1 all the way up, right? Similar across all disciplines. Again, you saw that map where we're building a whole bunch of green hydrogen projects, as well as the projected demand for the next 5 years. Again, trying to fulfill 40% of our current needs through clean hydrogen means. That's going to mean that that person will automatically be poached, not even have to search for a new job in this industry, and be able to fulfill roles in different regions, right? And it's pretty scattered throughout the U.S., not as concentrated in certain pockets like oil and gases. So they'll be able to maybe even travel, get per diem benefit, things of that nature as well. And same thing for folks here in Houston, maybe to help train those folks. We usually have some kind of per diem program where they would come out to West Texas, take on an apprentice, work with them as a crewmate, train them up, and then the next hydrogen project comes, that skill becomes that much more valuable.
So I have a question. So
Yeah.
do you ever find competition for workforce between, say, a company like AES and maybe the more traditional oil and gas companies, even oil and gas companies making hydrogen? Just curious how it all is kind of working together these days.
Oh yeah, so I think what comes to mind always in construction is like welders. They're always like top of the line folks that are like #1 crap that's being poached. As a part of some of the production tax incentives, we're required to pay prevailing wages. I think that was also alluded to earlier as well. So that means looking at the local area, making sure that we're paying above I guess the main rate. I'm not quite sure of the jargon, but I could definitely follow up on that if you want. But that is pretty much how we plan to prepare for that. But yes, there'll be a tight supply, which I think is also another good thing for the workforce, because that means that we're going to have to go out and train people up to do that job in order to make sure that we could build these projects. I think there's another question for the gentleman here.
Hi, thank you for that interesting presentation. I was just wondering if you could speak more to how your company and other companies are partnering with kind of educational institutions, whether it's UT and other state schools, trade schools, community colleges, and high schools, to make sure the curriculum is matching the growth of this industry and that the workforce will be prepared for the future growth.
That's actually a really great question, because it's something that we definitely need to prepare for. I think through initial engagement like this, again, making it aware that this massive growth is coming. I mentioned that the project that I'm supporting is around closer to 50,000 tons per year, and we're going to 1,000 times that in like 5 years, which is crazy. Even if we accomplish half that, still a massive growth. So something we got to be cognizant of. As a part of, I'll allude back to high velocity, because again, we're plugged in with the University of Texas here in Austin to really try to understand some of the needs and how we could benefit the community. But I do think we do have to penetrate the other levels as well. And as a part of the DOE hub, a part of our objectives are lined out so that we have these engagements to really address workforce needs, especially because some of these projects are near term and a lot of them are long term, right? Depending upon how 45V all shakes out, which is driving a lot of these decisions. So we'll need to actually go, I agree completely with you, we need to go out to these local trade schools in various areas to say, hey, we're gonna have this massive supply. What could we do to help augment that? Whether it's a scholarship program, sponsorship program of sorts, in order to help, one, raise the awareness, and two, try to drive people into the industry through attractive pay, which I addressed earlier as well.
I'm pretty loud. So.
Yeah, I hear you just fine. Yeah.
Thank you for what you are sharing. I represent Texas Engineering Executive Education, and part of our portfolio is PTEX, who have served the oil and gas industry training for over 80 years as part of a mandate from the legislature here in Texas. Okay. And you talk about transferable skills from the oil and gas industry, and I would like to learn from a magnitude perspective, how much training, how much professional development or upskilling, reskilling do you see coming into the pipeline with the growth that you anticipate in the space?
Man, I think it's going to be hard to put a number to that because we're going to be pulling not only exclusively from oil and gas, but really a lot of industries in order to enable this, right? I can't, it's hard to quantify, but I could only leverage my own self as an experience as well as my counterparts. I think all the engineers on my team right now, they're all from an oil and gas background or an IGC background for reference, right? But with that being said, it doesn't stop there. We have to learn the industry because it's still in its infancy stage. I think a lot of people everywhere are learning about it, right? So I think as we acquire knowledge and we understand the gaps that we have internally, that's when we're going to be going out and trying to meet those gaps externally and try to either hire consultants to help us fill those gaps and say, hey, what do we need to do to prepare ourselves and also to prepare others as we tackle this massive growth, right? So I think that's going to be the answer. I'm sorry it wasn't straightforward in terms of like a specific quantity, but it's going to be, I think, more qualitative analysis at that, yeah.
So I have another question. So from your experience in the green hydrogen industry, is there a skill or a certain skill set that jumps to mind right away that's, this is a unique thing that we have to train people to do, and I wish it was part of some sort of curriculum? Is there anything like that?
I guess in top of mind, what comes to me is engineering, which is already addressed for the most part. I do think maybe a holistic training on the renewable energy ecosystem and how best to leverage energy. I think that would be helpful because I think, again, across the board, we're all trying to figure out, all right, how to best use this molecule that we're creating, right, for the benefit of humankind. And it's really an argument across the board on, all right, let's use it for this versus that, right? Even though it's beneficial in all cases, we also have to kind of think about, one, the growth and demand side of it, and two, the economics of it. So I think having some kind of techno-economical class on that, that's kind of half business, half engineering oriented would be very beneficial, even for myself, to really sit down and go through that, to really appreciate how best to leverage our energy.
Awesome.
That's a great question, though.
We have time for one more question. Do you want to grab it there?
Hi, so you mentioned that AES has already made an agreement with labor unions. Do you know how or if the other high velocity partners are also working with labor unions yet?
I'm not aware of that yet, so we're still waiting to formally receive our award. And officially, we kind of went ahead of the step. I think the first step is receiving the award. The second step is then studying the community, engaging the community, working out MOUs, LOIs, things of that sort. And so we just kind of took the ball and went ahead and did that proactively. So I'm unaware of the other members, but I'm sure it's an obligation for us to do so in order to even receive the federal funding. So it's gonna happen. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's thank Daniel again. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.